Welcome to this commentary on the Christian New Testament. In effect, it comprises a complete study course on theology and Christianity, and I hope to take people through the text, which I will read aloud, but also commentaries on the text interspersed, so that the understanding can hopefully be teased out and made clear. My purpose in undertaking this is to really continue and fulfill my work as a teacher of religions and spirituality and philosophy, and to help students who are struggling with trying to come to terms with what Christianity means at whatever level of engagement that is, whether as simply a lay person interested in the history of the church and its teachings, or a scholar or a theologian, or someone training for the priesthood, or at whatever level of engagement. I hope that something I say, hopefully many things I say, will be of value and of interest. But I also hope that the commentary and the teachings here will be of interest to non-Christians, to people outside Christianity, and from either another faith or no faith, because I'm going to be commenting on these Christian scriptures from a perspective of transpersonal history, namely a sympathetic, scientific attempt to understand the spiritual content of the teachings, to look at them from within their historical context as much as possible. So I'm going to be drawing on my extensive studies in the history of Christianity and my concern and passion for historical scholarship, but also for the existential meaning of the texts. And I think if one is simply studying them historically, then go elsewhere. It's not this course is about their historical situatedness, but also their existential and spiritual meaning for us now in a turbulent world. That's what makes these scriptures timeless and of eternal value. They speak from the transpersonal source, so to say, just as do the other great sacred scriptures of mankind. Unlike, say, the Qur'an in Islam, which is understood by most Muslims to be the divine message for mankind, channeled through Muhammad, the status of these scriptures in Christianity is similar in that they are believed to be divine, to be transmissions from the spiritual world, to have a sacred status, to be canonical in that sense. Now, one of the paradoxes of Christianity is, of course, there are 4 separate accounts of Christ's life and teachings, 4 Gospels which tell the same story from a slightly different angle. Some of the things in them are slightly contradictory. I don't see that as a problem. I see that, on the contrary, as a sign from the scriptures that no one version is absolute. We need a multiplicity of views, and that truth is multidimensional, as the Jains say, and as most schools of philosophy affirm. You need to look at things from a multidimensional perspective. And so in my own commentary I will be shining light, hopefully, from different perspectives, taking cognizance of different hermeneutic traditions, be they Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox or Gnostic or whatever. So before I start, and I'm going to begin with the Gospel of Matthew, which is the first in the New Testament, I want to just say a little bit about my own background and studies, just to fill in, so that listeners have a clue as to where I'm coming from and why I'm making this recording. I should explain I'm basically a lifelong student of Christianity, and a seeker of ultimate truth. I first began my serious study of the Bible, both Old and New Testaments, in Canada during the period from 1977 to 1981, in my early 20s. I'd been brought up in Brighton, born in Montreal, and then we moved to Sussex. I was brought up in Brighton. I went to a Church of England primary school, so my first kind of memories of Bible teaching and so on is at that level, the story of the man that builds his house on rock as opposed to sand and so on. They were simple little teachings that resonated, and you could immediately get the point of them. So then I went to an Anglican public school called Brighton College, which was on Saturday mornings we had chapel. That was a more formal kind of religious experience. Had religious studies teaching from an Anglican vicar, and I have to say I don't think it was explained very well, and there were so many questions that I wanted to ask that I suppose there wasn't time really to cater for. So I found that experience a bit frustrating, but I sensed a wisdom there that I wanted to understand, a depth, but wasn't able to engage with properly. I was only in the Brighton College Junior School, so I think I was probably ahead of my time, asking, I think a number of staff said I was asking questions that, I should wait till I'm in the senior school. In fact, I went then to Brighton Grammar School, where, again, it was a slightly frustrating experience. We learned Latin in both schools, so I had a great love of classics. But we never really studied Christianity, never really did theology. I was never shown what an incredibly interesting study it is. We were never asked to read a gospel or even passages from it. I don't think we were ever set homework for RE. And I think the general consensus was it wasn't a serious subject. It didn't require it only required either faith or not. And if you didn't have this mysterious thing called faith, which I hadn't got a clue what it meant, then you weren't intellectually interested enough to study it. So I got through my entire teens without even ever reading very much of the New Testament. Never read a gospel. Because I came from a family that regarded itself as humanists and post-Anglican skeptics, and so again, it wasn't something we did at home. We read Shakespeare as a family. We read philosophy. So it was only in my when I went to university to study philosophy at the University of Bristol, there's a bit of engagement with some theological studies, Augustine and Descartes and so on. But again, it was taught in a way that was very cerebral, very abstract. There was no actual instruction. Look, to really understand Augustine, you've got to read the New Testament. I mean, I cannot believe, looking back, that our tutors didn't actually say that. Because, of course, you can't understand Augustine without understanding the New Testament. And you can't really understand the New Testament without reading the whole of the Old Testament. But no, I don't know, it's as if teachers were afraid to point out the obvious. So it was only later when I actually decided that the University of Bristol Philosophy Department wasn't really teaching me in the way that I wanted. I was very interested in global religions, comparative spirituality. I got into studying Buddhism and Eastern thought, Sufism, yoga. I'd started practicing yoga and meditation, and I naturally oriented more towards those Eastern religions. We're talking the mid-70s, and I was reading people like Alan Watts and Chogyam Trungpa and the Eastern inspired mystics from California. And so the Bible didn't occur to actually study it in any serious way until I got to Canada and set up for a self-directed study course for 4 years using the University of Calgary in Alberta, mostly at the University of Calgary, which is a superb institution. And the library there has the entire range of classics of Christian spirituality and literature. And it was there that I read the Bible and the New Testament fully, entirely, for the first time, which was a wonderful intellectual experience I had about the age of 22, and which really has inspired me ever since to understand what an amazing piece of spiritual literature the New Testament is, and how interesting it is, and how intellectually challenging it is to study it. I went deeply into it in terms of the study of its geographical context, its linguistic complexities. Were these texts written in Greek, or were they oral traditions in Aramaic? When were they translated into Latin? How did they get into English? All these kind of facets to biblical studies got to me very exciting. And that began a lifelong engagement with the text. I also at that time became a Quaker attender at Calgary meeting, because I felt that to really understand these scriptures you have to engage with them existentially. You can't, unlike some books you read, you just, you read it and then you move on to something else. I felt with the Christian scriptures there's a call to a kind of witnessing. You have to, it's a kind of text that you stand up and say either yes or I suppose no. I stood up and said yes, but in a very kind of English, very very quiet kind of way. I wasn't drawn to the kind of exuberance of evangelical type worship. I never have been. I'm a retiring kind of person. But I do believe in intellectual exuberance, and I think that one has a commitment, if you're serious about philosophy and scholarship, to ferret out the absolute truth behind things. So that's what I've done ever since, really, starting in my 20s. I then came back to Britain. I taught myself classical Greek in order to read the New Testament in Greek. I feel that you can't really understand these texts without knowing at least some Greek. So I'm going to be referring to the Greek texts as we go through in the commentaries. And I also at that time undertook a very complex research course in Christian theology, and that's when I read the Church Fathers in translation. The University of Calgary had the entire set of translations of all the major Church Fathers going back to the ancient Greek and Latin, and I just found myself absolutely awed at this tradition that I really knew nothing about. Although I'd been brought up in an ostensible Christian country, I was amazed that I'd never been educated into these treasures, really. And so then I continued on into the medieval scholastics and the study of William of Ockham and Aquinas and Duns Scotus, and just absolute awe at the depth of these early Christian thinkers and the way they were reconciling Greek thought, the newly discovered Aristotle, with their Christian faith and their biblical understanding. And then I looked at the Renaissance thinkers and their universalism and combining biblical understanding of Christianity with the rediscovered Platonic teachings and people like Ficino and Pico della Mirandola and so on. And then at the early modern period, the Reformation, and I read through the fountainheads of the Reformation, looking at Calvin, Luther, and so on. So I tried to do it as comprehensively as possible as a study in Christian theology, and that's what I'll be drawing on in my commentary on the Bible. Subsequently, I came back to London, and I actually began a second degree, this time in modern history. I felt the need to study and research what had been going on in the world and why we got to the position of the Cold War. This was back in 1985 when I began my degree, when East and West Europe and Russia and America, the Soviet Union, were threatening to blow each other up with nuclear weapons. And I felt, as a mystic and a philosopher and just a normal citizen of the globe, that this was intolerable and that something should be done to stop this imminent omnicide, as one philosopher called it. So I came back to Britain, and working with a chap called John Francis Phipps, we set up a group of philosophers for peace around this time, 84. And we used to have meetings in Notting Hill Gate, bringing people from all sides of science and education and philosophy and religion. My theory was, if we get the world talking about the differences they have, be they Marxist or non-Marxist, Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, and get concentrating on the philosophical similarities we all share, then we can begin to disarm. We won't need to blow each other up. We won't need to drop nuclear bombs on each other. And that was in a sense applying the years of philosophical study I'd been doing up until then. And they were very successful. A series of meetings took place in Notting Hill Gate. I met some fascinating people. And we had some very profound and deep discussions, which were not sadly recorded, but certainly I have notes from all those meetings, and I remember them well. I was also studying at the University of London and completed my degree. I had 2 children, 2 daughters at this time, who were born during the course of the degree. I got a 2-1 in the end, partly because I spent months preparing for a conference of philosophers of peace in Sussex University, which was taking place in 1988, when I should have been revising. But I took my duties as coordinator of philosophers of peace in Europe quite seriously. So I then embarked on a program after graduating of working with a project at the University of London to create an Institute of Peace Studies. And that became eventually a job that I did for several years. The whole question of peace, not just in Europe but globally, was uppermost in my mind, and I saw that as part of one's Christian duties, really. Whatever our understanding of Christ's work and teachings, it seems to me the witness to peace was absolutely paramount. So during my degree, in fact, in 1987, I also was baptised. I'd not been formally baptised into the church. This was at King's College Chapel at the University of London. And it was a very moving ceremony. My 2 little baby daughters were there. And it's a long story how it happened. I was talked into it by the chaplain at the LSE, who was one of the London team of chaplains, who became a friend of mine. I was going to talks there. And I took him along some advertisements for the Blake Society meetings at St James's Church, where I used to go. And he knew I'd never been baptised. I had been a Quaker and didn't see the need for it. I regarded myself as a Sufi, a kind of universal mystic. But as a matter of courtesy, really, to the formal structures of the church, I feel that they have value. I feel that the institutions of the church, the great teaching universities, the work done by parish priests and so on throughout the world is important, and it was a way of affirming that, really. I was already a universal mystic and as much a Christian before my baptism as afterwards. I don't think one needs to be baptized to understand the wisdom of Christianity. But I think that it's it's a sign. It's an outward sign. I think it says in the 39 Articles, these sacraments are an outward sign of inward grace. And there's no harm in that. So I subsequently ended up teaching at the WA for London from 92 to about 2000, and taught a great deal on the history of Christianity as part of that, in all different kinds of courses, evening classes. Also ended up teaching mediation skills to pupils at various schools in London, including Archbishop Michael Ramsey's school. Michael Ramsey was one of the great Anglican theologians of the 20th century. I was teaching there from 92 to 93, and in a school in Peckham. I also was on the lecturing panel at Birkbeck College at the University of London from 93 till about 99, again teaching courses on the history of Christianity, which fascinating. I met some incredible students who were from all denominations, Catholic, Anglican, Quaker, Baptist, you name it, and obviously Jewish and secular and Hindu, and I learned as much as I taught. I've always loved teaching adults because they have so much life experience to share, and they bring that to the class. Birkbeck College, as part of the University of London, I was working with Lord Combermere, who was the head of religious studies at Birkbeck at the time. He's dead, sadly. I then ended up teaching similar classes for the University of Oxford from 97 to 2000. Again, comparative theology, history of ideas, history of spirituality and the search for peace. Did a course on peace and justice in the different religions of the world. And obviously I love teaching at Oxford. Again, met some fantastic students and have stayed friends with many of them. In 1999 and 2000 I was invited to speak and teach a course at a seminary in the States, in Oklahoma, called the Sancta Sophia Seminary, which was a very exciting experience for me, run by Reverend Dr. Carol Parrish, who's an esoteric Christian, part Cherokee, raised Roman Catholic. It's a superb centre. It's a bit like a Findhorn in the Midwest, in Oklahoma. And I had some wonderful experiences there, again teaching comparative spirituality and esotericism, and also running a course on mediation from an interfaith perspective, which I'd set up by then. I then subsequently I trained as a religious studies teacher in the secondary school sector when I moved to Wales in 2000, and worked for 10 years approximately as a religious studies teacher. And obviously one of our main jobs is teaching Christianity. So I taught in schools in Wales. I was head of religious studies at Llandrindod, Wales, which is a wonderful place. It means the Church of the Holy Trinity, Llandrindod in Welsh. I was learning a bit of Welsh. I have great respect for the Celtic Christian traditions, travelled all over Wales, went to Bardsey Island, fell in love with the Welsh mystical tradition of the churches and so on, and the early Welsh saints. I lived in a place called Llanyrville, which is named after Saint Ervil, who was known as the golden-tongued one, and I lived there happily for 7 years, running my Peace Studies Institute that had grown out of the work for the University of London. I simultaneously ended up teaching in Nottinghamshire for a couple of years as head of humanities in a big school there. Again, teaching Christianity part of. One of the problems, of course, as a religious studies teacher in a secondary school in Britain is there's no time really to do the subject justice. Kids come to classes with a chip on the shoulders, with a kind of bias against it, normally from fairly secular backgrounds. So the notion of religion is antipathetic to their backgrounds often, and again there's this I think this epistemological error that seems to run deep in our society, certainly in Britain, that religion is about faith, and if you don't have it, it has no interest to you at all. There's no understanding that religion is actually, or religious studies, is an interesting intellectual subject in its own right, whether or not you have this mysterious thing called faith. I reject the notion that religion is simply about faith. It's about knowledge to me. And to me, faith that grows out without knowledge is inadequate. As an Anglican, I take the view that reason and faith need to go together. An irrational faith is dangerous, but so is faith in reason alone. You've got to balance reason with spirituality and with faith, and as we go through the commentary on the New Testament, we'll see that actually is the core of what I think Christianity is about. I don't think it's a religion purely about faith, as some people present, but I also don't think that critical reason is so clever that it can dispense with its insights entirely, which the post-Christian world has done, and the secular world. So anyway, difficult experience sometimes trying to teach in schools with youngsters that have this bias against the knowledge, and because you only have literally an hour a week, there's no way that you can get across the subtlety and complexity of the concepts behind even one of the great world religions like Christianity, let alone the 6 that you're supposed to cover. So a slightly frustrating experience. I then moved to another school in Dorset, Poole Grammar School, which was a different kettle of fish, a very bright all-boys school. Was able to teach a certain degree more intensely, but even there, limitations of time and the epistemological bias against religious knowledge still runs deep, even in the grammar school sector. And although there was more intellectual interest in it, I think the other problem that one has is the very narrow curricula that one covers. the people that set the agenda of the examination system for GCSEs, for instance. I think, I mean, there is a problem. The subject is so big that to give comprehensive coverage is virtually impossible. But again, time pressure, you have to cover sort of topical issues. You can't really go in depth into Christian theology as much as I would have liked, or any other religious theology. You do a bit of this, a bit of that, and it's like learning by rote. You know, you learn about what's the Christian attitude to abortion, what's the Muslim attitude to abortion. You move on. What's the Christian attitude to divorce, etc., etc. There's no real in-depth knowledge possible in that context. So again, slightly frustrating. I then moved to a private school, an all-girls private school in Wiltshire, which was, I think, it was a Christian foundation for a start, called St Mary's in Caen, with a deeper living tradition of understanding of spirituality and the importance of Christianity. So a lot more engagement there, and I found that a very exciting, experience to teach. And for a year was working in the religious studies department, developing courses, not delivering just on Christianity, but also on Islam and Indian religions and so on. And it gave me a glimpse of what the schools could be like, where religion is taken a bit more seriously. And then, again, a year teaching in a similar all-girls private school in Sussex, in Eastbourne, with again, a more sympathetic kind of understanding by the pupils as to the importance of religion. But again, no time to really develop the concepts, the ideas, and to really reveal the true profundity of these teachings. One thing I've always made clear to my students, say the ones studying GCSE at St Mary's or Eastbourne or at Poole, is I would set them homework to read a gospel. They'd look at me like I was mad. What, a whole gospel? Well, yes, they're only about 30 pages long. I mean, for English literature, GCSE or A-level, you're supposed to read long passages and poems and novels and so on. I mean, it's the core set text, really, of the GCSE programme, at least one gospel. And obviously, if you're doing a course based on Christianity, there's a lot of in-depth questioning about it. And at A-level too, you can opt to study through the lens of Christianity, although most schools I've taught in choose to do philosophy of religion. But I personally regard it as an unsatisfactory education if you come out of a school experience without ever having read at least one gospel and Acts and some letters, but preferably the whole New Testament. It's not difficult, it just takes discipline. So I'm partly making this recording in the hope that it will encourage students to read for themselves and to think for themselves and to access these texts that lie at the root of European and Christian and world civilization in many respects. And yet which are largely alien to us now. People do Facebook, they don't read the New Testament. And I think it's to our intellectual impoverishment. And this is not about whether or not one identifies with the label of Christian. I mean, that we'll see, that is a problematic label and means many, many different things to different people. It means really enlightened, awakened, anointed, Christed. Someone who identifies with that possibility, the possibility of enlightenment, the possibility of awakening. And we'll see as we go through the commentary that exactly what was at the root of what Jesus was saying about that, and how his narrative and his story can provide a clue for us now how we can get there.